Welcome to Ask the Expert, an award-winning daily series from 8:30 a.m. to 9 a.m. to help small businesses. If you have any questions this morning, please do ask them in the comments of the live feed. And if you need any more advice, join the official Intuit QuickBooks SMB community group on Facebook. Accountants and business experts are on hand 24/7. Now, as always, we will be running a poll during the live session today, so please do engage with it and I'll be revealing the result at the end. So, welcome to today's Ask the Expert. I'm Jenna, and I have the pleasure of taking you through the next half an hour, talking all things mastering your pitching and communication skills. Now, that's a big topic, but that is what we're talking about today. And I run a coaching and training business called the I Am Hub. It's all about supporting business owners and entrepreneurs to communicate with more confidence and impact, whether that's pitching quite formally, whether that's informal conversations and presentations. That's what I work on with my clients. And my background is in broadcast journalism. That's really where I say I found my passion for public speaking. I always get a roll of the eye moment whenever I say that, because many people think there is no such thing. But I have learned to love the skill of public speaking, and that's really translated into what I'm doing now with the I Am Hub. And when I do work with clients, it's about helping them find their voice and really maximizing it for business and career success. I've seen and reaped the benefits of that skill. And that's really what I want to be talking about today. How can you master these skills to help you grow your business as well? So it is a big topic, and I'm going to break it down into three key areas just to make it as beneficial as possible before we then jump into your questions. So we're going to look at the why, the what, and the how of pitching and communicating. And to kick off, we're really starting with the preparation. And the preparation phase, a lot of people think is just about developing your content of what you want to say in your pitch. Maybe it's a pitch to investors, for example. Maybe it's more of an informal conversation with a prospective client. Whatever it is, maybe you're delivering a presentation, however long or short that might be. These are sort of the skills to work on. And the preparation, ultimately, the basics of the preparation is the same. So you can apply this and what we're talking about today to hopefully a lot of different areas in terms of communicating. So when we start out, we think, okay, what do I want to say? What do I want to include in my pitch? What do I want to get across in this conversation? What's my slide deck going to look like? And that's a great place to start, to think about your script, your key points, maybe the questions that you want to ask or might get asked as well. But I would go back a step before you do that and ask yourself about the why. So why is it that you're in this particular pitching or communication situation? Because the more you can focus on why am I doing this and what do I want that outcome to be, that's really going to help you hopefully be more successful with the goal that you've set for this particular communication opportunity. So that why could be, okay, you're pitching to investors. What my outcome and the reason why I'm doing this is to get funding for my business. So the goal is to get the investors excited about my business and to keep that conversation going. Or maybe after my pitch, they're going to say, yeah, absolutely ready to invest. Sometimes it takes longer than that. But think about the outcome. Even if it's a prospective client conversation, thinking about an example that they ask for more information, they are interested and they want to find out more, or they say, yeah, I want to sign up with you straight away for your product or service. Nail down the why, because everything then you deliver and you develop for your content is going to drive that as well. So you might be thinking, well, that's not a skill. That is part of the skills. It's not just how we deliver and the skills of delivering a good pitch or presentation. The preparation and nailing that why is really important. So then that leads us on to the what. And one key thing that I want you to consider here is, and the question that often comes up is, to script or not to script. And it really depends on what works for you. I often work with early stage entrepreneurs who are going and preparing for quite short competition pitches. So it might be a 3-minute pitch followed by a Q&A. Now, in that 3 minutes, they've got a certain amount of criteria and information they have to get in. So my advice is always to script that 3 minutes and rehearse it to the point that you know it really well, so you can deliver it off the cuff. If it's more of a conversation, if it's a longer presentation, maybe I would advise not to script and just try to think about the key points that you want to talk around. So you've got some bullet points there, you might have some cue cards, but you're not relying and putting that pressure on scripting a 10-minute, 20-minute, 30-minute presentation. So just give it some thought in terms of scripting or not scripting. And once you've got down sort of your key points, maybe you've developed your slide deck, great, you've got some content that hopefully is going to engage your audience. We then start to move on to the how. So this is really where the skills often come in. And that's what a lot of people think is, the skill of public speaking is in the how. Absolutely. But if you've done that prep work, you've done the why and the what, then we can think about how we're actually going to engage our audience to listen to what we've just prepared. So with the how, you're really tapping into the practice of what you've said. And if you speak to any sort of communication specialist, anyone that talks about speaking, the practice is absolutely key. Don't just stop when you've got your slide deck ready to go and you're thinking, right, I've spent some time, I know what questions I'm going to ask, I've prepped some answers for questions I might get asked myself, I've got my slides ready, my content. Make sure you're leaving time to practice. That's where the real impact is going to come in. So when we're talking about mastering your pitching and communication skills, make sure you're practicing. And within your practicing, record yourself, record your voice, video record yourself if you can. As cringy and awkward as it might be, just get over those moments. And that's kind of what I always say to clients. I don't like the sound of my own voice. No one really likes the sound of their own voice. Just really get over that awkwardness. You're the only one that's going to see these recordings, but you'll be able to pick up on, have I got as much energy in my voice? Do I need to kind of have a bit more inflection, which I'll come on to shortly? Think about your body language. So record yourself and practice. That's the first part of the how, as you're kind of developing the what of your presentation. And there's 4 key techniques that I wanted to mention before we sort of dive into questions today. The first one, and you've probably heard of a lot of these, but these are really sort of recaps in terms of the skills. Think about mirroring the person that you're with. Now, this is more when it's sort of one-to-one. So if you're pitching in front of one person, if you're having a chat with a prospective client, for example, we've probably all heard this idea of mirroring builds rapport, and it does, and subconsciously we might do that as well. They cross their legs, you cross your legs, you've got hand gestures, eye contact, you fold your arms, you fold their arms. So it's about building that rapport and that connection. So think about where you can. Mirroring is more for in-person than online, but you'll see how these techniques do apply to both as well. The next one, and I've mentioned this already, is about finding that inflection in your voice. Some of us might have naturally monotone voices, which is fine. It just means we need to put a bit more effort and energy into trying to get a bit more rise and fall into our voice, because that's what's going to engage our audience. It's a tip that you'll hear time and time again, but that's where recording yourself will really help tap into that as well. The next tip is around facial expressions. Again, talking about body language. Think about your facial expressions matching the topic and the tone of whatever communication situation that you're in. And things like eye contact, online, in person, it's a little bit easier. Online, eye contact with your camera, all of this is going to really help master those skills that we're talking about today. And then finally, think about how animated you are. Don't go to the point where it feels uncomfortable. You can probably tell I'm quite an animated person when I present. I use my hand gestures quite a lot, but that's natural for me. But find what works for you. Just try to think about how you can use your hand gestures when you're pitching or presenting in person and online, because that's, again, going to help get that energy levels up as well. So those are some techniques to think about. And as I say, you can apply them online as well as face-to-face. I'm starting to go back to face-to-face training, face-to-face coaching for the first time in just over a year, really, which is quite exciting. I will tailor my approach, but ultimately the preparation and the delivery is quite similar. There's just some tweaks that you can make there as well. Okay, the final point I want to make before I am going to jump into your questions, because I can see them coming through, is a topic that I'm really passionate about, one of my favorite topics, and that's about authenticity. Because this is something, and this is a skill that's going to really help your pitching and communication have even more impact, go to the next level of impact. And that's what we're talking about today. If you can show up as authentically you as possible in these moments of pitching, presenting, communicating, you're going to enjoy those situations a lot more, and you're going to build more connection with your audience. So it's not just a case of, just be yourself. Try to tap into things like your values, tap into what your strengths are, what you believe in. And if you're talking about something you're passionate about, that's going to come across as well. I could dig into authenticity quite a lot, but it's really something to think about, because often we think, how do I want to show up to this presentation? What shoes do I need to step into to be a different version of myself? Actually, what I would encourage you to do is really think about, who's the authentic you? How can you be as natural and genuine as possible? Because that might relax your nerves if nerves are creeping in as well. And it's going to hopefully get that enjoyment and that connection across. So just something else to think about: the why, the what, and the how of communicating, but also really showing up with authenticity as well. Really important. Okay, so we're going to dive into your questions, and I might have the opportunity to give you a little bit more insight into that authenticity piece as well as we go along. But what we're going to start with is Jasmine on Instagram. I'm just going to read this out. I've had feedback that sometimes I talk too quietly, but when I try to speak louder, I sound like I'm shouting. Any advice on speaking confidently? And actually, you've almost hit the nail on the head there, Jasmine, where you said speaking confidently, because that's the balance you're trying to find. And I'm projecting my voice now, and hopefully you can see that I'm projecting my voice. I'm not in shouting mode, because when you're shouting, you really got to kind of be in that mode of trying to get that person to hear you. Actually, if you just think about it, it's projecting your voice. So you're not going into shouting mode, it's just trying to project. That's going to help you quite a bit as well. Think about the opportunity that you've got as well. If it's online, you can have a little bit of a trick with your microphone. I'd always recommend getting an external microphone. This is mine here, if you can see that. And just try to turn that up a little bit. That will help you. But when it's in person, imagine that even if it's only one person that you're speaking to and you've had feedback that you are a bit quiet, imagine that you've got a group of people. Imagine the person at the back of the cafe, not literally, but wants to hear you. Because if you're quite quiet, you're going to have to go quite over the top with really projecting your voice more than you think you need to. So that's my biggest tip, is just focus on projection, not shouting, and just practice it as well. Practice recording yourself and listen to it back, and you'll see the difference in volume, but you'll see that you won't go into shouting mode, hopefully. So hopefully that gives you some tips there as well. Aaron on Facebook Messenger, particularly for sales pitches, knowing your potential clients' goals and pain points is very important. Absolutely. How should we go about researching this ahead of a pitch? Great question, Aaron. So whenever I work with, especially early stage entrepreneurs, because this is key to include in your pitch at every stage of business, to be fair, but my experience is often with early stage entrepreneurs, the problem and the solution part is key. It's, okay, what problem am I solving for my users, for my customers, and how can I almost complete that puzzle? I always see it as a bit of a puzzle piece. You've got the problem, you've got your solution, boom, you bring them together. In terms of your research, try to really talk to as many people as possible. Try to talk to potential users, potential clients, and really tap into those people as well. Because you could have an idea that you think, oh my goodness, this is a brilliant idea. This is definitely a problem that people have. But you need to back that up and justify it. So it's all part of this testing phase. So with your research, the best research you can do is to actually pick up the phone, talk to people, ask friends, family for references or recommendations to speak to people if they're not your target client as well. So talk to as many people as possible. Yes, there's research that you can do online to an extent. Maybe have a look at competitors who might be offering something similar to you. How are they presenting the pain points? You know, what's the need for their business? And that gives you a bit of confidence thinking, well, other people are doing this, so I must be onto something. But go a little bit further. Try to test it with your audience. Put a survey out there if you can, just to get some really quick stats and sort of figures coming through. But if you can, try to do some interviews, like informational interviews as well. Yes, the survey is great for quantity of answers, but try to get some quality answers as well. So that's the biggest thing that I'd recommend to you, Aaron. Hopefully that helps. Okay, next up, we've got Kayla on Instagram DM. What's the best way to manage a Q&A section after you've given an initial pitch? Love this question. And how should we prepare for this bit? Great question. You'll know in my introduction, you'll probably remember I mentioned, part of that preparation might be thinking about what questions you might be asked and trying to anticipate potential questions and think about what are the key points you want to put across. Now, the thing with Q&A is there's only so much prep that you can do. you're never going to be able to predict what all of questions are. And as much as the pitch side, you think, yes, I've nailed that, I've scripted that, I know I've got that down to a T. The Q&A is the curveball part. You're always going to get curveball questions as well. Biggest piece of advice is, first up, anticipate what type of questions you think might come up. So for each of the sections you've mentioned in your pitch, whether that's competitors, your solution, a little bit more about your market research, all of these things that you've put into your pitch, try to think, okay, if they ask me a question on each of those areas, what are the key points that I want to include in my answer? That will just give you a little bit of confidence, hopefully, that you've got something in your back pocket for each of those areas. You might find yourself repeating some of the stuff that you've mentioned in your pitch, but that's absolutely fine. Try to use the Q&A as an opportunity, as an extension of your pitch. Rather than sort of always repeating what you've said, you've actually got some opportunity in the Q&A to give them even more information as well. And then when you're preparing for curveballs, because there's always curveball questions that come our way, just try to practice a couple of responses that shows that you're confident and credible, but you're being honest as well, because we're always going to get a question at some point that we think, my goodness, I want the ground to swallow me up because I have no idea how I'm going to answer this question. In which case, just prepare a response that's something like, it's a really great question. So acknowledging the question. I don't have the information that you need right now. You're being honest, but I will follow up afterwards and make sure I get that to you. You're making a promise. You're making a sort of an action to say, I will get it to you. Work out and practice that in your own way, but that's a 3-step approach for those curveballs. So hopefully, Kayla, that answers that question and gives you some prep for the Q&A. Love to hear how you get on with that. Over on Twitter, Tom, how do you avoid saying too much or over explaining? I often fall into this trap, Tom, I must say. I think a lot of people do. When we're talking about something that we're passionate about, especially when we're passionate about something, often we can get a bit carried away because we want the audience to really buy into what we're saying. We want them to be on our level of passion and excitement about the topic. They might not be. Normally, no one's going to be as passionate as us about our business. But you've got to be quite, excuse me, you need to be quite strict with yourself and know what the boundaries are. And this depends on if it's a conversation with a client. If you feel like you've been doing most of the talking, just recognize that and start asking your prospective clients some questions. Start getting them involved in the conversation. Similarly, with a presentation, if it's quite an interactive presentation and you want feedback from the audience and it's meant to be that way, then just check in with the audience. Are they still following you? Maybe put a question out there and get that interaction going. When it's a pitch, think about if you've got a time limit as well. I would always have a timer, whether it's online or face-to-face. I'd have something that I can see the time and make sure I'm checking in so I'm not going over as well. Because there's nothing worse as being in an audience, if it's as an investor, potential client, audience member, and you're thinking this is going to be a 10-minute presentation and then 15 minutes go by and they've switched off after 10 minutes. So check in with yourself. You'll notice that as well. Maybe put a timer up so you can check in there as well. But I would just make sure you're throwing some questions to the other person, especially if it is that one-to-one conversation as well. The last thing you want to be doing is overpowering that conversation. Really try to make sure you're making it as two-way as possible. The other thing I do is ask for feedback. I often do this. If I'm building up to quite a big pitch, but it's for a client, sort of one-to-one, I've got a call coming up with them or a meeting, I'll just ask someone that I'm quite comfortable with, maybe on my other half or family member or a friend, just to kind of role play how the conversation might go. So I get practice in what my key points are. That's another tip. You'll notice that I'm a fan of practicing, but it really does make a difference. So Tom, hopefully there's some tips there for you. Over on Instagram, Sean, I've heard of mirroring, but do you think it's a bit risky if the person you're mirroring notices it? Or do you think most people don't realize when it's happening? It's a really, really good question, to be honest. I think if you make it really obvious, like, okay, when they fold their arms, I'm going to fold my arms. When they cross their legs, I'm going to cross my legs. When they blink, I'll blink. Then yeah, fair enough. Let's not go over the top on it. But often this actually happens subconsciously. If there's a natural connection between people, you'll find that, and I've experienced this as well, even watching people, I'm a massive people watcher. If you're in a cafe, watch a couple of people. If there's a really good connection, you'll notice that, oh, okay, so they've got their arms folded, they're quite relaxed, their right leg's crossed over their left leg, and they look quite similar. And it's almost their body language subconsciously matching as well. So sometimes it happens naturally. I wouldn't force it too much. I think if you can pick up on it and just try to mirror them a little bit, it's more around their body language. Try to make sure you're facing them as well. Sometimes it's a bit awkward, isn't it? When you're sitting somewhere, depending on the type of situation, you don't want to be facing sort of to the side or away from them. Be as open as possible and make sure you're facing them and having that direct body language connection as well. So great question. I think don't overthink it too much. Allow it to happen naturally. But if you're not feeling that connection, then it just might be something to tap into to help build that rapport as well. Next up, over on Facebook Messenger, Eve, I agree that authenticity is important, but equally I worry about reacting too honestly. Little LOL in there. For example, what should you do if a client responds to your pitch by saying something that makes you cringe? Interesting. I mean, we all have these cringy moments. I think sometimes there's a part of our mindset that we need to embrace cringe-worthy moments. They're going to happen. Yes, we can try to avoid them. I think that's why the recording is really key, because that's a cringe fest moment, I would say. When you listen to your voice back, we hate it. When we watch ourselves back, we think, my goodness, is that what I look like? Is that how I animate? Use my hand gestures. But if we can put ourselves in those situations more and more, we're going to get used to these cringy moments. So authenticity is an interesting one. It's not to say, and if it's in a professional setting, we're talking about our business pitches and conversations here as well. We don't want to, go all in and sort of be our super sociable selves if it's a professional setting. It's trying to tap into things like, okay, am I playing to my strengths here? Am I almost aligned with my values? Am I sort of talking about something that I believe in more often than not? Yes, because it's your business. It's just to try to get into the mindset of not feeling like you have to step into someone else's shoes or put on a front, because then we're not being necessarily true to ourselves. And there's only so much we can keep up a false pretense as well. If we're going to be working with this client long term, eventually maybe that barrier is going to be broken down and they're going to see the real us. We'd rather than see it right from the start. I hope you agree with that as well. So yeah, if a client responds in a way that makes you cringe, I guess I'm trying to think of an example of what that might be. I don't know, maybe you try a bit of humor, for example, because that's naturally you. I've definitely been in that situation and someone hasn't laughed, or it's just gone the wrong way. Then just try to be confident to brush past it as well. But my point with authenticity is really trying to show up as naturally and authentically as you. So you feel like it's that mindset. I think you'll know when you're showing up authentically. It will feel natural. It will be enjoyable as well. So don't feel you have to go too honest and spill everything that you know about yourself, but keep it professional. Just try to show up as authentically as possible. But great question. That's one that I could probably talk about quite a long time. I'm going to move on though, because we've got a couple more questions to go. So over on Twitter, Ibrahim, how do you recover from a bad pitch? Love this question. Is there still a way to win the potential client, or at least limit any damage done? And yeah, I would say it's almost, I relate this to kind of first impressions. When you make a bad first impression, or you think you've made a bad first impression, you can always come back from this. There's a point where you need to take it as a learning opportunity. I wouldn't say that if a pitch has gone bad, and it depends on what you describe and define as a bad pitch, Ibrahim, as well, because it might be that, okay, the investors didn't invest, for example. It doesn't mean that you did a bad pitch. It just means that there wasn't the right fit. And that will happen time and time again. It's tough to get investment for businesses. It is about resilience and picking yourself back up, but learn from those opportunities and get some feedback if you can. If the definition of a bad pitch is I forgot my words, I ended up sort of reading from my script, I didn't make eye contact, I just wanted the ground to swallow me up, then that's a learning opportunity. I wouldn't say that opportunity's gone, because you can almost go into, when the pitch is finished, depending on the feedback that you get from the audience and from investors, clients, whatever it might be, then just try to always follow up with them after a pitch as well. And I would almost be honest, it depends on the situation, that, I know this, this wasn't the best articulation or the best, what's the word I'm looking for? Sort of presentation of our product or service. However, I'd love the opportunity to send you some more information, or I'd love the opportunity to be able to, pitch to you again in the future. And they might come back to that. You never know. But I think there's a barrier of reading the situation, knowing when to let it go and just learn from the experience, and also seeing an opportunity to follow up, keep in touch with them, and maybe 6 months down the line, you've regathered yourself, you've got further in your business, and then you approach them again. So that's what I would say. I think the recovery part is very much about, let's see it as a learning opportunity rather than focusing on, oh, that was such a bad pitch. And you'll hear that advice quite a lot, but for pitches especially, you need to be resilient, pick yourself back up and go for it again. Seth on Instagram, what's the best way to get feedback on a pitch? Sometimes hard to tell if it ever really goes wrong, as everyone's always polite after the presentation. You'd be surprised. It depends on what room you're in and what people you're in. I'm very familiar with the Dragon's Den style and investor pitches as well. And sometimes the feedback can be brutal, and that's brilliant. If you're that type of person that enjoys that constructive feedback, and hopefully as a business owner you want constructive feedback, that's really key. But just if there's an opportunity to ask for feedback afterwards, I'd say wait for the pitch and Q&A to be complete, and then follow up afterwards to say, really appreciate your time listening to my pitch. I'd love some feedback from you on the pitch, what went well, and what, more importantly, what could be improved. So you're really encouraging them to give you honest feedback. So, I wouldn't necessarily do it in the moment. So as soon as the pitch is done, the Q&A, so can you give me some feedback on that? Wait for the result, wait for sort of the honest feedback in the moment. And then I'd say follow up afterwards as well. Sometimes you'll get it, sometimes you don't. And I think that's something we just have to accept. But for you, Seth, I would just say follow up, really say that I'm really keen to learn from every experience that I have. Any feedback, what could be improved and what went well would be great. I'd be surprised if they don't come back to you, but it's a good opportunity to try. If there's a way that you can record it when you're pitching as well, if it's online, I always, you could try to record yourself on another device. You can then watch yourself back and nitpick, not too much, but see what you could improve as well. Okay, gonna try and squeeze in another one if we can. Clara from Instagram, what's the best way to wrap up a pitching presentation? Love this question because we're starting to wrap up the Q&A. So how appropriate. I would say make sure you script, as much as I say, don't script too much unless it's a really short presentation. Script your final sentence. And I always talk about the plane analogy. Know where you're taking off and know where you're landing. So script that first introduction so you get off onto a good foot, and script your final sentence so you know what you're aiming for. This will stop you from sort of drifting off. How many presentations do we see where someone kind of finishes and they're like, so yeah, that's it really. And you think, that could finish stronger than that. So I would say, wrap it up, give a bit of a summary. That's my business. I hope you've enjoyed listening to me. I'm now very happy to answer questions if there's a Q&A, or if it's, thank you for listening to my pitch. I hope you found that useful. If you've got any questions, you can contact me on ABC. So just doesn't need to be something too fancy. It's a really easy thing to say, but script it, practice it so you know what you're aiming for as well. Hopefully that's been helpful. I think I've got a bit more time than I think, so I'm going to just squeeze in one more before I go to the poll results. Gianni, sometimes get a bit in my head when I'm pitching. I've had feedback that I come off a bit robotic. How can I loosen up while still landing the messaging? Love this. Super quick tips before we wrap up. This is going to sound awkward and cringy, but we're all getting out of our comfort zones today. Try to actually physically loosen up and do a little bit of a warm up before you're going into a pitching situation. If it's offline, if it's face to face, go to the toilet, do a little bit of sort of loosening up, literally do some stretches, loosen your arms, deep breaths, and some vocal warm ups as well, just to really kind of help getting that energy flowing. And also practice as much as possible, because the robotic sometimes comes across when we think we need to script or when we've got quite a monotone voice. Just see it as a conversation as well. Think about your mindset going into those situations, because if it's more informal, and it feels like more of a conversation than this formal pitching, presenting situation, hopefully that will start loosening up a bit as well. But that is about practice and putting yourself in situations where you get to speak publicly in front of people as much as possible, and you can hopefully start enjoying those moments as well. The authenticity piece comes into that as well, Gianni. Try to think about, okay, I just want to turn up as me, have a conversation, and then go from there. Okay, so hopefully you've got some good tips there from that Q&A. I'm going to go to the poll results because we asked you today, do you feel confident about pitching your business? 10% of you said yes. Interesting. 60% of you said sometimes, and 30% answered no. I'm hoping with some of the tips today that can start to swing towards the yes, or at least get most of you into the sometimes as well. And it depends on the situation where we're working, you know, in a bit of a confusing state. Sometimes we're online, sometimes we're offline. We need to tailor our approach. That's totally understandable. Put the practice in, tap into your authentic style, and hopefully that will build your confidence when you're pitching as well. Hopefully those results can go more towards the yes and the sometimes. So that's it for today. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you do have any questions for myself, you can connect with me on LinkedIn, Jenna Davies. Be more than happy to answer any more of your questions. But coming up on Ask the Expert tomorrow is Rachel Martin. She's an accountant and founder at Accountant She. It's a female-led accountancy firm that specializes in working with female entrepreneurs and business owners. Tune in to find out what it takes to study to become an accountant. That sounds super interesting. Make sure you catch that tomorrow. Also, a reminder that if you do need any more advice, join the official Intuit QuickBooks SMB community group on Facebook, where accountants and business experts are on hand 24/7. I've really enjoyed answering your questions this morning, and I hope you have a great day.